The phone rang, piercing through the quiet stillness of my apartment. It was nearly midnight, and I was nursing a glass of whiskey while absent-mindedly flipping through a book I wasn't even reading. The caller ID froze me in place. Jenna. Her name flashed across the screen like a ghost from my past. My ex-wife. The woman who had shattered my life 10 years ago. We hadn't spoken since the divorce papers were signed and filed. Why was she calling now? My first instinct was to ignore it, let it go to voicemail, and keep her in the graveyard of my memories. But curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mark, her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but I could hear the tremble in it. It wasn't the confident, vivacious woman I had once known. This was someone else, someone afraid. I didn't reply immediately. I wanted her to feel the weight of her decision to call me, to know that I wasn't the man she could summon at will anymore. When I finally spoke, my tone was cool, measured. It's late, Jenna. What do you want? There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, uneven and shallow, as if she were bracing herself. I need your help. That was all she said, for words that turned my world upside down. Help? From me? The man she betrayed, humiliated, and left behind like yesterday's trash? I let out a dry laugh, the bitterness unmistakable. Help? That's rich, Jenna. Why would I ever help you? Her voice cracked, and I could hear the tears she was trying to hold back. Please, Mark. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious. I don't have anyone else. The venom in her voice that used to cut through me was gone, replaced by desperation. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the whiskey in my glass as I weighed my options. Every instinct told me to hang up, to let her deal with whatever mess she'd gotten herself into. But there was something else, a tiny, burning ember of curiosity that refused to be snuffed out. What's going on? I finally asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, as if debating whether to tell me. It's Tom, she said, and that name hit me like a gut punch. Tom, the married man she had destroyed our life for. The man she claimed to love more than me. I clenched my fist, memories flooding back unbidden. Her lies, the nights I spent alone while she was out with him, the gut-wrenching betrayal when I found out. What about him? My voice was ice now. He's after me, she said, her voice breaking. Mark, he blames me for everything. For his marriage falling apart, for his life going to hell. He's been calling, threatening me. I think he's watching me. I'm scared, Mark. I leaned forward, my interest piqued despite myself. Why should I care? Sounds like karma finally caught up with you. She let out a shaky breath. I deserve that. I know I do. But please, I'm begging you. I don't know what else to do. There was a rawness in her voice I hadn't heard before, a vulnerability that felt alien coming from her. This wasn't the woman who had coldly walked out of my life without a second glance. This was someone who had been broken, stripped of her armor. Why me? I asked after a long pause. Surely you have friends, family, someone else you can call. She laughed bitterly, a hollow sound. I burned those bridges a long time ago. You're the only one who knows me well enough to help. Please, Mark, just hear me out. If you still hate me after that, I won't bother you again. I stared at the phone, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Logic screamed at me to walk away, to let her deal with the consequences of her actions. But another part of me, the part that still carried the scars she left behind, wanted to know why. Why she was here, crawling back after all this time. Fine, I said finally. You have 10 minutes.
Talk.
Her relief was palpable through the phone. Thank you. Can we meet, please? I'll explain everything. I don't feel safe talking about this over the phone. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling the headache forming. This was a terrible idea. I knew it. But something about her tone, the weight of her words, wouldn't let me say no. Where? There's a diner on Westfield Avenue, she said. Can you meet me there? I'm already on my way. I sighed, draining the last of my whiskey. Fine. 30 minutes. Don't make me regret this, Jenna. As I hung up, I stared at the empty glass in my hand, the echoes of the past rising around me like smoke. I didn't trust her. I didn't trust myself around her. But if this was my chance to finally get answers, to confront the woman who had ripped my life apart, I wasn't going to waste it. Grabbing my keys, I headed out into the cold California night, unsure whether I was walking into a trap or the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand. The diner on Westfield Avenue was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. Faded vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner that probably hadn't worked since the 90s, and the faint smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. I walked in, scanning the room until my eyes landed on her. Jenna sat in a booth near the back, her once radiant beauty dimmed by the wear and tear of time. Her blonde hair, always meticulously styled when we were together, now hung loose and unkempt around her face. She looked up as I approached, her eyes hollow, shadowed with exhaustion. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Was this really the same woman who had torn through my life like a hurricane? She stood as I reached the table, and for a second, it looked like she was going to hug me. I took a step back, hands in my pockets, making it clear I wasn't there for a reunion. Her face fell, and she sat back down, motioning for me to join her. I slid into the booth across from her. "You've got 10 minutes, Jenna." She nodded, her fingers trembling as she clutched a coffee cup. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I didn't know if you would." "I shouldn't have," I shot back, my voice cold. "But you called, and here I am. So, let's hear it. Why is Tom after you?" She flinched at his name, her grip tightening on the cup. After everything happened, his wife found out about the affair." She paused, glancing at me to gauge my reaction, but I didn't give her anything. She left him, took the kids. His career tanked. He blamed me for all of it, and was he wrong? I asked, my tone cutting. "You were the one who got involved with a married man, Jenna. You didn't just destroy our marriage. You wrecked his too." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked genuinely ashamed. "You're right," she admitted. "I was selfish. Stupid. I don't know what I thought. That we'd run away together? Start a new life? But it didn't happen like that." I leaned back in the booth, crossing my arms. "So what does he want now? Closure? Revenge?" Her hands shook as she set the cup down. At first, it was just angry phone calls. Threats. He'd show up at my apartment, yelling about how I ruined his life. But then it got worse. He started following me, leaving notes on my car. One night, I came home and found him waiting for me in my living room. I frowned. "Did you call the police?" She shook her head. "I didn't think they'd take me seriously. He's careful, Mark. Never leaves evidence. And the things he says, it's like he knows no one will believe me." A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Jenna, the woman who had lied so easily, now terrified that no one would believe her truth. "And you think I'm going to fix this for you?" Her eyes met mine, pleading. "I don't know who else to turn to. You're the only person who ever really knew me, Mark. The only one who might care enough to help." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Don't mistake my presence here for caring, Jenna. I'm here because I'm curious. Because I want to understand how you became this." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down entirely. "I didn't mean for it to end up this way," she whispered. "After you left, everything fell apart. I tried to move on, but nothing ever filled the hole I made when I destroyed us." Her words were like a knife to the chest, but I refused to let her see how deeply they cut. "You should have thought about that before you crawled into bed with him." She didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small stack of photos, sliding them across the table to me. "I thought you might want proof," she said softly. I picked up the photos, my heart sinking as I flipped through them. They were surveillance shots, grainy but clear enough to make out Tom's face. In one, he was standing outside an apartment building. In another, he was sitting in a car parked across the street. The last one sent a chill down my spine. It was a close-up of Jenna through her window, unaware she was being watched. "Where did these come from?" I asked. "A friend," she said. "She works in private security." I begged her to help me, but she said there wasn't much she could do without getting involved herself. I set the photos down and studied her. For all her flaws, she looked genuinely afraid, and despite my anger, I couldn't ignore the gravity of the situation. If what she was saying was true, Tom had gone off the rails. And if she was lying, well, I'd find out soon enough. I'll look into it, I said finally. Her face lit up, but I raised a hand to stop her. Don't thank me yet. I'm not doing this for you. If this guy is dangerous, I want to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else. That's all. She nodded quickly, her relief palpable. Thank you, Mark. Save it, I said, standing. I'll be in touch. As I walked out of the diner, the weight of what I'd just agreed to began to settle in. This wasn't about helping Jenna. It was about understanding the truth. And if there was one thing I had learned in the past 10 years, it was that the truth had a way of revealing far more than you bargained for. Driving home from the diner, my mind raced with a tangle of emotions. Seeing Jenna again after 10 years was like revisiting a half-healed wound, one that still ached at the slightest touch. The way she looked, the fear in her voice, even the desperation in her eyes. It stirred something in me I wasn't ready to face. I couldn't tell if it was anger, pity, or the faintest trace of something I thought had died long ago. When I reached my apartment, I dropped the stack of photos on the kitchen counter and poured myself another drink. My phone buzzed. It was Jenna, texting me the address where she was staying, along with a simple plea. Please be careful. Careful. Right. As if care had been her guiding principle in life. I downed the drink in one gulp and stared at the photos again. Tom's face, twisted in a glare, stared back at me. He had aged as much as Jenna, his jaw more lined, his hair thinning. But there was an intensity in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. If Jenna was telling the truth, then he wasn't just angry. He was unhinged. I called a friend of mine, Jack, a private investigator I'd worked with on a few cases in my post-divorce years. Jack wasn't the kind to ask too many questions, which was why I trusted him. Jack, it's Mark. I need a favor. Mark. Long time. What's going on? His voice was chipper, but I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. I'll explain later. Can you meet me tomorrow? I've got a situation that needs your expertise. Sure thing. Usual spot? Yeah. Noon. As I hung up, I felt a flicker of relief. Jack was thorough, and if there was more to Jenna's story, he'd find it. But for now, all I could do was wait. The next day, I met Jack at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. He was already there when I arrived, nursing a coffee and scrolling through his phone. Mark, he greeted, standing to shake my hand. You look like hell. What's going on? I slid the photos across the table and gave him a brief rundown of Jenna's call, leaving out the personal history. I need to know if this guy's a real threat or if she's playing me. Jack studied the photos, his brow furrowing. These were taken by someone who knows what they're doing. You said she got them from a friend in security? Yeah, or so she claims. Can you dig into him? His name's Tom, last name Foster. He's the guy she cheated on me with years ago. Married back then, but who knows now? Jack let out a low whistle. Messy. You sure you want to get involved in this? I'm not doing it for her, I said firmly. If he's stalking her, he's dangerous. If he's not, I want to know what game she's playing. Jack nodded. Fair enough. I'll run a background check, see what I can find. We chatted a bit longer, Jack probing for details while I gave him just enough to work with. As we wrapped up, he leaned forward, his expression serious. One thing, Mark. If this guy's unhinged, be careful. These things can spiral fast. That evening, Jenna called. Her voice was steadier this time, but there was still an edge of tension. Did you find anything out? Not yet, I said. I've got someone looking into it. Thank you, she said quietly. I mean it, Mark. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful. I hesitated, the bitterness rising unbidden. You're right, you don't. But this isn't about you. If Tom's a threat, I need to know. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft, almost wistful. I miss you, you know. I miss us. My grip on the phone tightened. Don't, I warned. You don't get to miss what you destroyed. I know, she whispered. I never stopped thinking about you. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken regret. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I ended the call and stared out the window at the city lights, wondering if I'd ever truly be free of her. The next morning, Jack called. Mark, you're not gonna like this. What is it? Tom Foster's been in some trouble, all right? Domestic disputes, restraining orders, the works. But here's the kicker. He's not acting alone. What do you mean? I asked, my pulse quickening. He's working with someone. A woman. They've been spotted together a lot recently, and get this. Her name's Jenna. I froze. That's not possible. She called me because she's scared of him. Jack sighed. Maybe. Or maybe she's playing both sides. Whatever this is, it's messy, and it's not what it seems. The line went silent as I processed his words. Jenna and Tom, working together? The possibility made my stomach churn. But if that were true, then her call for help wasn't desperation, it was manipulation. I thanked Jack and hung up, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Jenna's safety anymore. It was about the truth, and whatever game she was playing, I intended to win. I sat in my car outside Jenna's apartment building, my thoughts swirling like a storm. Jack's revelation replayed in my head. Jenna and Tom have been seen together recently. It didn't make sense. She had sounded terrified on the phone, desperate for my help. But if she and Tom were working together, what was the real story here? I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, weighing my options. Confronting her outright might tip her off if she was playing me. But if there was even a shred of truth in what she'd said, I needed to tread carefully. I decided to stick to my plan, get more information before making my move. Later that evening, I got a text from Jenna. Can we meet? I need to explain everything. It was perfect timing. If she wanted to talk, maybe I could get her to slip up. I replied, telling her to meet me at a small bar on the outskirts of town. Neutral ground, far from her apartment or anywhere she might feel comfortable. She arrived 20 minutes late, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she slid into the booth across from me. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she clutched her bag like it was a lifeline. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice soft but strained. I'm here, aren't I? I replied, keeping my tone neutral. So, start talking. What aren't you telling me? Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. What do you mean? I told you everything. Cut the act, Jenna. I interrupted, leaning forward. You and Tom. Someone's seen you two together. Care to explain? Her face went pale. That's not. Mark, it's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're playing both sides. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached into her bag. You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. Enlighten me. She pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. He's blackmailing me. I hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside were several photographs, grainy but damning. Jenna and Tom in a hotel room, his arm around her waist, her face turned toward him in what looked like a kiss. Another showed them sitting close together in a car. There was even one of them exchanging what appeared to be an envelope full of cash. What is this? I asked, my voice low but sharp. He took these months ago, she whispered, her voice cracking. We met up once, just once, because he said he had something important to tell me. Then he took these pictures and started threatening me. Said he'd send them to my boss, my landlord, anyone who could ruin my life. I stared at the photos, my stomach twisting. And the envelope? What's in it? Money, she admitted. He's been extorting me. He knows I can't go to the police. Who's going to believe me after everything I've done? I leaned back, trying to process what she was saying. Was this the truth? Or just another layer of manipulation? If you're being blackmailed, why didn't you tell me that from the start? I asked, my skepticism bleeding through. I was ashamed, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't want you to think I was still involved with him. Her explanation made sense, but something still didn't sit right. How do I know you're not lying to me now? She looked me straight in the eye, her expression raw and vulnerable. You don't, she said simply. But I swear to you, Mark, I'm telling the truth. I need your help. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. If she was lying, she was damn good at it. Fine, I said after a long pause. I'll help you. But if I find out you're keeping anything else from me, it's over. Understand? She nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. Thank you. I promise that's everything. The next day, Jack called with another update. Mark, I've got something you'll want to hear. I traced some of Tom's movements over the past few months. He's been in and out of a storage facility on the east side of town. Storage facility? I repeated, frowning. What's he keeping there? That's the interesting part, Jack continued. I got access to the facility's records. He rented the unit under a fake name, but the payment records trace back to him. My guess? He's hiding something. Maybe the dirt he's using against Jenna. It was a lead, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. Send me the address. That evening, I drove to the storage facility, my heart pounding as I parked outside. The place was eerily quiet, illuminated only by a few dim floodlights. Jack had provided me with a key he'd managed to replicate, and I used it to unlock the unit. Inside, I found a chaotic assortment of items. Old boxes, a desk, and several filing cabinets. But what caught my attention was a stack of envelopes on the desk, each labeled with a name. One of them read Jenna. I opened it and froze. Inside was a USB drive and several more photographs, even more damning than the ones Jenna had shown me. These weren't just staged moments. They were explicit, intimate, and deeply compromising. It wasn't just Jenna and Tom. There were other men, other places. My stomach churned. This wasn't blackmail, it was leverage. And Jenna had left out a very important part of the story. I pocketed the USB and the photos, my mind racing. Jenna might be a victim, but she wasn't innocent. Not by a long shot. I sat in my car outside the storage facility, staring at the USB drive in my hand. The evidence I'd found turned Jenna's story on its head. If she was a victim, she was a complicit one. The photos, the videos, the damning contents of the envelope, they painted a picture of a woman who had been deeper in the muck with Tom than she wanted me to believe. I drove home, my mind racing. Once inside, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop, bracing myself for what I might find. As the files loaded, my suspicions were confirmed. Dozens of videos and photos, all time-stamped, detailed Jenna's involvement with Tom and several other men. Some of them were high-profile, corporate executives, politicians, men with reputations to protect. This wasn't just blackmail. This was a web of deceit and manipulation, and Jenna had been at the center of it. The next morning, I called Jack. You were right, I said, my voice grim. Tom's not just some scorned lover. He's running a full-blown extortion racket, and Jenna's been his accomplice. Jack whistled on the other end of the line. I had a feeling this was bigger than it looked. So, what's the plan? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the mess on my desk, the photos, the USB drive, and the stack of names. We take them both down. But first, I need more leverage. Leverage? Jack asked, his tone wary. You're playing a dangerous game, Mark. I'm not playing, I said coldly. This is about justice, and I'm going to make sure they both pay. That evening, I met Jenna at her apartment. She opened the door looking relieved, but her expression faltered when she saw my face. What's wrong? She asked, stepping aside to let me in. I walked past her, ignoring the question, and sat down on her worn couch. We need to talk. She closed the door, her hands fidgeting nervously. Did you find something? I nodded, pulling the photos and USB drive from my bag. Her face went pale as she recognized the envelope. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I asked, my tone icy. What matters is that you've been lying to me. Again. She took a step back, her voice trembling. Mark, I can explain. Don't bother, I interrupted. I already know. About the other men. About the money. About everything. Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't buying it this time. It wasn't like that, she whispered. Tom. He forced me into it. I laughed bitterly. Forced you? These videos don't look like coercion, Jenna. They look like you were enjoying yourself. She sank into the chair across from me, burying her face in her hands. You don't understand, she said, her voice muffled. I didn't have a choice. He threatened me, Mark. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd ruin me. You already ruined yourself, I shot back. You had a choice every step of the way, and you chose this. She looked up, her tear-streaked face a mix of shame and desperation. I know I messed up, okay? But I'm trying to fix it. I called you because I thought you could help me. Help you, I repeated, shaking my head. Jenna, I'm not your savior. I'm not your second chance. I'm here because I want to make sure you can't hurt anyone else. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. What are you going to do? Expose you, I said simply. You and Tom. I have everything I need to bring this whole operation crashing down. She stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. You can't do that. You'll destroy me. You destroyed yourself the moment you got into bed with him, I said coldly. Literally and figuratively. She stared at me, her chest heaving as she struggled for words. Mark, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Don't do this. I rose from the couch, gathering the evidence into my bag. You should have thought about that before you called me. Goodbye, Jenna. The next day, I met with Jack and laid out my plan. We'd anonymously deliver the evidence to key figures, police, media outlets, and the spouses of the men involved. It was risky, but it was the only way to ensure Jenna and Tom couldn't worm their way out of this. By nightfall, the wheels were already in motion. Jack sent the first package to a local news station, while I mailed another to the police. The final piece was the hardest, sending the evidence to Tom's wife, the woman whose life he had destroyed. But it had to be done. 2 days later, the fallout began. Headlines splashed across every major outlet. Corporate blackmail ring exposed, high-profile figures implicated in scandal, and extortion operation linked to local woman and ex-lover. Jenna called me that night, her voice shaking. Mark, what did you do? What needed to be done? I replied. You and Tom are finished. She sobbed into the phone, but I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just emptiness. You've ruined me, she whispered. No, Jenna, I said. You ruined yourself. I hung up and stared out the window, watching the city lights blur against the night sky. Justice had been served, but at what cost? As the weight of it all settled on me, I realized I wasn't just fighting Jenna and Tom. I was fighting the part of myself that still wanted to save her. And for the first time, I felt free. The storm that followed the public release of the evidence was nothing short of chaos. By the time the morning headlines hit every major news outlet in California, the world Jenna and Tom had built on deceit began to collapse. I watched it unfold from the comfort of my apartment, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, my phone buzzing with updates from Jack. The first casualty was Tom. His employer, a well-known corporation, immediately placed him on indefinite leave pending an internal investigation. By noon, he was trending on social media, his face plastered across countless exposés. Anonymous tips, thanks to Jack, flooded law enforcement, revealing even more about his activities. Tax fraud, illegal surveillance, and years of manipulating vulnerable women into compromising positions. Jenna wasn't far behind. Her landlord served her an eviction notice, citing her involvement in criminal activities as a breach of her lease. Her name became synonymous with scandal, her reputation as tarnished as Tom's. I felt no pity. She had played a dangerous game, and now she was paying the price. By evening, my phone buzzed with another call from Jenna. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. Against my better judgment, I picked up. What do you want? I asked, my tone as cold as the air outside. Mark, please, she begged, her voice barely audible. You have to help me. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Help you? You must be out of your mind. I'll do anything, she said, desperation thick in her voice. I'll turn myself in, testify against Tom, whatever it takes. Just, please, don't let it end like this. I paused, considering her words. She sounded broken, a shadow of the manipulative woman I'd confronted just days ago. But then I remembered the years of betrayal, the lies, the chaos she'd sown not only in my life, but in so many others. You made your choices, Jenna, I said, my voice steady. Now you get to live with them. Mark, she sobbed. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't do this alone. Please. The sound of her crying filled the silence between us, but it didn't stir me. Instead, It reinforced the distance I'd put between myself and the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with. You're right, I said finally. You don't deserve forgiveness. Goodbye, Jenna. I hung up before she could reply and let out a deep breath, a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness washing over me. I had won, but victory had never felt so hollow. The next day, Jack called with a new update. Mark, you're not going to believe this, he said, his voice tinged with excitement. Try me. Tom's wife, Jack began. She's not just sitting back and watching the fallout. She's filed for divorce, full custody of their kids, and a restraining order. Oh, and she's cooperating with law enforcement. I smirked. About time someone took him down. There's more, Jack continued. She's also suing Jenna for alienation of affection. It's not common, but in this case, she might actually win. The evidence you sent her? Gold mine. I leaned back in my chair, letting the news sink in. Good. They deserve everything coming to them. They do, Jack agreed. But how are you holding up? This kind of thing can mess with your head. I shrugged, even though he couldn't see me. I'm fine. Just glad it's over. But was it really? The fallout might have taken care of Jenna and Tom, but it didn't erase the scars they'd left on my life. Winning the game didn't mean I'd forgotten the pain of playing it. That evening, I went for a long walk through the city. The streets buzzed with life, oblivious to the drama that had consumed my world. I found myself drawn to a quiet park, the kind of place Jenna and I used to visit in better days. I sat on a bench, the cool breeze carrying the faint scent of pine, and let my thoughts wander. Part of me wanted to celebrate. I had exposed the truth, brought two manipulators to justice, and reclaimed control over my life. But another part of me, quieter, deeper, felt an ache I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about closure, about finally putting to rest the demons that had haunted me for a decade. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Jenna. I didn't answer this time. Instead, I blocked her number and deleted every message she'd ever sent me. It was over. Truly over. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. The sun streamed through my window, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat on my balcony, watching the city wake up. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the future. For so long, my life had been defined by what Jenna had done to me. But now, I had a chance to start over, to rebuild without the shadows of betrayal looming over me. A notification pinged on my phone, a news alert about Tom's arrest. I opened the article and skimmed through it, a faint smile playing on my lips. Justice had been served. Jenna and Tom were finished, their schemes unraveled for the world to see. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, letting the morning sun warm my face. For the first time in 10 years, I felt free, and I wasn't looking back. A month had passed since the fallout, and life was finally beginning to feel like mine again. The headlines had quieted, the chaos receding into whispers as the world moved on to its next scandal. Tom was facing criminal charges, his empire in shambles. Jenna had disappeared from the public eye entirely, her name forever tied to betrayal and disgrace. I thought that was the end of it, until she called one last time. The number was unfamiliar, but the second I heard her voice, I knew. Mark, she said softly. It's me. I didn't hang up, though every instinct told me to. There was something different in her tone, something final. Against my better judgment, I let her speak. I needed to talk to you, she began, her voice trembling. I know you probably hate me, and I don't blame you. But I wanted to say thank you for helping me, even when I didn't deserve it. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city lights. I didn't do it for you, Jenna. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, she said, her voice heavy with regret. And I'll never forget that. I've lost everything, Mark. My home, my reputation, everything. But the one thing I regret most is losing you. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the love I'd once had for her. But it was buried under layers of pain and betrayal, too far gone to resurrect. You didn't lose me, Jenna, I said quietly. You threw me away. She let out a soft sob, and I could hear her struggling to compose herself. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I just wanted you to know that. I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch between us. Why are you really calling, Jenna? What do you want? Nothing, she said quickly. I wanted to say goodbye. Her words took me by surprise. Goodbye. Yes, she whispered. I'm leaving California, starting over somewhere far away. I don't know what my life is going to look like, but I need to get out of here. Too many ghosts. I didn't reply. Part of me wanted to wish her well, to offer some kind of closure. But another part of me couldn't forgive the years of pain she'd caused. In the end, I said nothing. Take care of yourself, Mark, she said after a long pause. I mean that. The line went dead, and I set the phone down, my emotions a tangled mess. It was the ending I'd wanted, the closure I thought I needed. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt quiet. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at a cafe, working on my laptop, when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned to find a familiar face, Lila, a woman I'd met at a networking event months ago. She was smiling, her dark eyes bright with recognition. Mark, right? She said. We met at that business mixer. How have you been? I returned her smile, surprised at how genuine it felt. I'm good, Lila. Better. Actually, how about you? Busy, she admitted, laughing lightly, but good. Do you have a minute? I'd love to catch up. Sure, I said, motioning for her to sit. As we talked, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in years, hope. Later that evening, as I walked home, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Jenna's call, her goodbye, the storm we'd both endured. For so long, I'd let her betrayal define me, but now, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness. I doubted I'd ever truly forgive her, but it was a release. A letting go of the anger that had anchored me to the past. I glanced up at the night sky, the stars faint against the city glow, and smiled. The future was mine again, unburdened by the weight of what had been. I was ready to move forward, ready to live, and I wouldn't waste another second looking back.